I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Do you all remember 1965? That was the year that James Brown, the godfather of soul, got down with I Got You, also known as I Feel Good. You know, the song that goes like this. Wow, I feel good, na 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 na. I knew that I would now, na 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 na. I feel good, I knew that I would now. So good, I got you. Dun 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 dun. That song by James Brown. Oh, do you remember 1965? Well, to be honest, I don't remember 1965. But my mom, my aunts, my uncles, they played songs by James Brown and other Motown artists, and they sang these songs when I was a child. My mom, aunts and uncles sang other songs as well, but these were not the funky, soulful melodies of Motown. Instead of being soulful, instead of filling your soul with joy, these songs were soul-robbing. These were the songs of discrimination, the songs of racial and residential segregation, the songs of police mistreatment of an African-American nation, the songs of high unemployment, substandard living conditions, and substandard education. These were the songs of the Watts riots. You see, somewhere between the release of Stop in the Name of Love by the Supremes and I Feel Good by James Brown, the Watts riots occurred. Unlike my mom, aunts, and uncles, I have no memory of the Watts riots either. But on August 11, 1965, a 21-year-old African-American man was arrested by the police. And this was 2 years after the famous March on Washington, when Martin Luther King delivered his famous speech, I Have a Dream. Now this incident in Watts was not a single incident, nor was it the most brutal of police incidents. But you see, in LA and in cities across the United States, police brutality against African Americans was the norm. Discrimination was the norm. Racial and residential segregation were the norm. Substandard living conditions, substandard education, and unemployment were the norm. Soul-robbing songs of dehumanization had been passed down from grandparent to parent to child across generations. And this time, the treatment of African Americans by a brutal police administration became a point of collective black resistance and frustration. I pledge grievance to the flag of the United States of America and to the oppression for which it stands, one nation clearly divided with liberty and justice for all who are wealthy and white. You see, poor white people are also oppressed in the United States. In April 1967, Aretha Franklin released R-E-S-P-E-C-T, Respect. You know, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, take care TCB. That song by Aretha Franklin. Now, Aretha was singing to her lover, but she could have been demanding respect from white America. You see, in 1967, 2 years after the Watts riots, and now 4 years after Martin Luther King proclaimed his dream, the Detroit riots occurred. Again, police abuse of African Americans was the triggering event in a nation where residential segregation, unemployment, substandard living conditions, and substandard education remained the norm. Between 1964 and 1971, numerous civil disturbances would rage through U.S. cities. There were those who compared the rioters to animals. For example, William H. Parker, the chief of the Los Angeles police during the Watts riots compared the Watts rioters to monkeys in a zoo. But researchers, there were several studies done, and researchers concluded that police abuse, unemployment, inadequate housing, substandard education, inadequate welfare programs, and white racism were to blame. One group, known as the Kerner Commission, concluded, our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Separate and unequal. Separate and unequal. I do not remember the riots of the 1960s, but I do remember the Los Angeles riots of April 1992. And by 1992, the songs of dehumanization, of racial and residential segregation, of police mistreatment of a black nation, the songs of high unemployment, substandard living conditions, and substandard education had become my own. I sang these songs to my white American acquaintances who looked at the videotape of Rodney King being beaten by 4 white police officers and said, my white friend said, Rodney King was on drugs, so the police had to beat him. I said, he was laying on the ground, not fighting back, sometimes trying to get up, to run away, being beaten back to the ground. There were 4 police officers and 1 Rodney King. My white acquaintances would say, well, we didn't see what he did, what Rodney King did before the police arrived. And I said, but we did see him laying on the ground, not fighting back. And my white acquaintances would say, but Rodney King was big and strong like a bear. And I would say, well, if he had been a bear, laying on the ground, not fighting back, being beaten by 4 police officers, at least the animal rights organizations would have complained. It was the Watts riots, the Detroit riots, and other civil disturbances all over again. It was 1992. And many Americans still were blind to police abuse against black Americans. I question my allegiance to the United States of America. I see the oppression for which it stands. I see 2 nations, separate and unequal, with liberty and justice for a few, and hypocrisy for all. Guess what? In 1992, 4 months after the LA riots, I came to Sweden for the very first time. I met Swedes, white Swedes, who looked at the LA riots and quoted Aretha Franklin. They asked, when is the U.S. going to give African Americans some R-E-S-P-E-C-T, some respect? These Swedes, both white Swedes and Swedes of color, looked at the U.S. and saw that African Americans were living with the horrors of dehumanization, of racial and residential segregation, of police mistreatment of an African American nation. They saw the inequities of high unemployment, substandard living conditions, and substandard education. Swedes, white Swedes, looked at the LA riots and saw something completely different from what white Americans saw. White Swedes saw civil protests and justifiable frustrations. I pledge allegiance to the social democratic state of Sweden and to the human rights for which it stands. One nation with civil rights and justice for all. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That's what Sweden means to me. But that was then in 1992, when Sweden was a social democratic state. It was also in 1992 when the United States of America was misbehaving as it always has. And this is now, 2013, when Swedes cannot seem to believe that the so-called democratic state of Sweden can misbehave just like the United States of America. When I look at the civil protests that started in Husby, beyond so-called criminals and irresponsible parents, I see residential segregation, the police mistreatment of a colorful Swedish nation, high unemployment and social marginalization of first and second and future generations. But I listen to explanations given by many Swedes, and I think I'm back in the United States of racist degradation. I listen to Swedes who only see criminals where they should see marginalized youth's frustrations, who blame irresponsible parents when they should blame the closing down of schools and centers of youth recreation, who justify police brutality when they should have called for serious government investigations of the police, at least as recently as 2008, when the police in Skåne used dehumanizing racist categorizations like Appajävel, Neger Negerson, Oscar Neger, and other forms of disturbing, demeaning racialization. So now, I question my allegiance to the so-called democratic state of Sweden. I see the increasing oppression upon which it stands. I see two societies growing more separate and unequal, with liberty for a few and hypocrisy for all. And I sing, Sweden, stop in the name of love before you break my heart. Stop in the name of love before you break my heart. Think it over, Sweden. Think it over.